At number 10 we have MINDWORM. First introduced in 1974's Amazing Spider-Man number 138, MINDWORM is a mutant who has the ability to absorb the psionic energy from his targets and sap their energy, and absorb that energy for himself. The first time he uses this power is on his own mother, who he accidentally kills by draining all of her energy in one go. This traumatic event drives his father into shock, causing him to run into traffic, killing him as well. MINDWORM has a tough life in and out of orphanages and homeless shelters, and eventually has a run-in with Peter Parker while he's living in a neighboring apartment. But when Parker notices MINDWORM's attempts at draining his psionic energy, he knocks out the villain, who is then taken to prison. Soon after this, MINDWORM reforms and becomes good, but is killed by a street gang after having never actually killed anyone using his powers other than his own mother. Honestly, it's a really sad story, and I don't know why they had to do him that bad, but that's MINDWORM. Pretty obscure. At number 9 is Spider-Side. First introduced as Spider-Man in the Clone Saga, Spider-Side appears as a super-jacked, massive version of Spider-Man that has Ben Reilly and Peter Parker wondering even more who the real Spider-Man is. But soon, this third Spider-Man soon goes mad and becomes Spider-Side, attacking the other heroes in a raving frenzy. He seems to be capable of some pretty nifty shape-shifting, as though he has some kind of symbiotic physiology, but ultimately he's left in the annals of the 90s and not really revisited again after the Clone Saga. My best guess is that he was just too OP and or confusing as a character. At number 8 is the Living Brain. This is one of the oldest Spider-Man villains in general, and especially on this list, and one that very few people ever reference these days. First introduced in 1964's The Amazing Spider-Man number 8, the Living Brain is a supercomputer that continually gets hacked by villains to attack Spider-Man and the people of New York City. Basically, this is what the height of AI looked like back in the 60s, making this villain not just obscure in the world of Spider-Man comics, but in the real world as well, as we are now in 2022. He looks like a dishwasher with arms, if we're being honest. But he sort of makes his rounds a little more than one might expect such a silly villain to. So I held him back on the list a little bit.
Number 6. Supergiant. Supergiant was one of the members of the Black Order that we did not get to see join the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and almost seemingly as part of her being cut out of being represented in the film, she also then died in the comics during the events of No Surrender. Not sure why everyone was hating on Supergiant. The issue of Avengers in which she died, Legacy number 680, was released in February of 2018, while Infinity War came out in April of 2018. She was a telepath who could easily unlock information or secrets within someone's mind. Perhaps she was simply too powerful for her own good, and that's what led to her being killed in the comics and kind of erased from existence in regards to the MCU. Still, I would like justice for Supergiant. Bring her back! Number 5. Quintets. The Quintets were Harley's gang that she put together after striking out on her own, separate from the Joker. She got them all matching button-down shirts that kinda remind me of bowling shirts, to be honest, with their names embroidered on the front. And she even held auditions when putting her gang together, choosing from a few old favorites and former goons of the Jokers, as well as some new yet lovable goons. They only lasted a few issues, but the Quintets were pretty fun while they lasted, and they helped give Harley some of the confidence she was looking for in regards to starting to build her own brand and criminal empire. The original team included Buster, Louis LeBeau, Kenny and Nick Stubear, and Lester Wilde. Though Lester was pretty useless. He fancied himself a Joker look-alike and imagined that Harley was in love with him, but he died on the team's very first mission. He also had literally no skills. Number 4. Gustav Hauptmann. Gustav Hauptmann was a scientist who originally was in Adolf Hitler and Red Skull's employ. However, he found himself kidnapped and forced to work for Dr. Doom later on in his life. Surprisingly, he actually found a lot of joy in his work as one of Doom's minions. Unfortunately, he didn't last too long. When the Fantastic Four infiltrated Doom's castle, Victor sent Gustav after them. Gustav took a flamethrower for the job, thinking it would be the best weapon against the heroic team. Dr. Doom, however, disagreed, worried for his priceless artwork which hung in the castle. In response to Gustav's poor choice, Doom killed him using a sonic device, and oddly enough actually ended up letting the FF go just immediately after that. Gustav was survived by his brother Gert, who then took his place as Doom's new mad scientist minion. I feel like that would be an awkward conversation. Your brother, I just killed him. Do you want to become my new mad scientist minion? I'd be like, no, I'm not. No, I don't want to die.
At number 3 we have Big Wheel. Originally taken on by Jackson Wheel, the mantle of Big Wheel is started when he owes money to Rocket Racer, who continues to hound him for payment. So he decides to have an enormous, extremely durable wheel crafted, which is outfitted with machine guns and can be commandeered by a driver. But his first big attack on Rocket Racer goes wrong, and Spider-Man just kind of watches it all go down. Basically, it ends in Big Wheel careening into the Hudson River. But he survives because the wheel is airtight, so he had that covered. Later, Big Wheel reforms himself and even teams up with Spider-Man at one point. Honestly, he's actually somewhere between obscure and quite prevalent depending on how you look at his legacy, because even though he seldom ever appeared in the Spider-Man comics, he has gone down as one of the most enjoyed obscure villains among Spider-Man fans. Okay, coming in at number 2 is Hypno Hustler. This guy is first introduced in 1978 and has a pretty short shelf life, like 1 issue short. Maybe with a couple more later on, but that's his main introduction. That's the only time we really see him. His powers are basically that he can hypnotize audiences at his shows using his hypnotic guitar. Playing alongside his band, the Mercy Killers, Hypno Hustler is first caught taking money and valuables from others in the audience at what appears to be their own will. But alas, it is hypnosis. He's also got these hypno boots that emit knockout gas and have retractable knives built into them as well. It's fair to say that this villain doesn't last very long and is sort of left in the dust after this first encounter with Spider-Man. Later, Hypno Hustler has a brief stint with Villainon, which is Villains Anonymous, where he tries to reform alongside the likes of Armadillo and Big Wheel himself. But that's basically it. At number 1 is Video Man. This guy's a double whammy because he is himself a rather obscure villain, all things considered. But also the technology that this character was designed in reference to is also obscure in itself, so I felt I had to put him at number 1 on the list. In fact, Video Man was abandoned so quickly by writers that his origin story is never even revealed. First appearing in the first issue of 2006's Spider-Man Family featuring Amazing Friends, he is quickly taken out after his first encounter and reduced to a little processor unit, which Spider-Man says he keeps in his freezer until, I guess, the present day, so as not to reawaken Video Man. What strikes me as strange about Video Man is that he was conceptualized in 2006, but his style is clearly referential to video games or maybe TV from the 80s or 90s, so just a total miss all around. And we're yet to see him again after his first fateful encounter in 2006.
Coming in at number 10 is Calendar Man. Julian Gregory Day, whose name is a pun on the Julian and Gregorian calendars, has an obsession with dates, committing crimes that always have a relationship to the date that they are committed on, usually covering the major holidays. Like most of the messed up members of the Batman's rogue gallery, Calendar Man had a rough childhood. His parents neglected him, which almost resulted in his death from days of exposure, which in turn resulted in his complete psychotic break, an obsession with days and holidays. First appearing in Detective Comics number 259 in September of 1958, Calendar Man was a bit sillier, using different costumes to commit crimes based on the days of the calendar, like dressing up as an Indian magician representing the monsoon season. But after the Crisis on Infinite Earths, Calendar Man was barely used and instead got a great revamp by writer Jeff Loeb, Batman The Long Halloween. In this new version, Calendar Man was institutionalized in Arkham Asylum and was deemed as an insane, ruthless criminal with abbreviations of the months tattooed around his head in a circle with no silly costumes or ridiculous crimes. Number 9. Flamingo. Eduardo Flamingo, known as Flamingo, is a world-famous serial taker of lives and assassin. He is well known for a specific thing he does, which inspired his sometimes name of the Eater of Faces, which explains itself, I'd say. Eduardo was actually a morally strong advocate and fighter against organized crime, but it changed when he was captured and underwent forced brain surgery that altered his personality, making him dangerously psychotic. Now, the incredibly colorful Flamingo is an enforcer and assassin, rocking a very unique look and somehow totally making a pink motorcycle not look silly. He has a dark, unfeeling personality and is an expert marksman, which makes up for his lack of powers and makes him a pretty dangerous threat for Batman. He has even temporarily paralyzed Damian Wayne, so think twice before you judge. He'll chew your face off, man. Batman's obscure villains usually happen to be a bit more serious and psychotic, but a lot of obscure villains can be completely ridiculous and silly, which makes me wonder, what are some of the silliest and wackiest, commonly unknown villains that you guys love? Let me know in the comments and I'll get on with this video. Number 8. Humpty Dumpty. With his house being demolished, his dog being run over, and his parents being crushed by a Christmas tree on Christmas, things weren't too great for Humphrey Dumpler. He was mistreated by his grandmother, who he was forced to live with, and because of his appearance and mental capacity, he was bullied. Of all things, the last straw for Humphrey was missing a subway train. Humphrey was obsessed with fixing things, and since the missing of the train, he started going out late at night to disassemble and reassemble mechanical devices which had upset him in some way. But since he wasn't very intelligent and all the info he got was from books, the things he fixed actually caused a lot of accidents. The first was the same train he missed, which then crashed. Now going by Humpty Dumpty, he was tracked down by Batgirl, who dislocated her shoulder, saving him. Humpty Dumpty fixed her shoulder, but then also revealed that he had evolved from disassembling devices to disassembling and reassembling people. Namely his grandmother, who he believed had to have been broken and in need of repair. So he took her apart, then attempted to sew her back together again with bootlaces. Wow, that got really dark, like really quick. Kind of uncomfy.
At number 7 is Typeface. This guy really confuses me because although his name is ridiculous and he doesn't actually have any powers at all, he still shows up a decent amount in various comics. First appearing in the year 2000, Gordon Thomas is radicalized after he returns from the Vietnam War and his wife immediately leaves him, taking their child with her. He then becomes a sign maker and goes off to be a criminal with letters drawn on his face. And he actually defeats Spider-Man during their first encounter by throwing letters at him, which doesn't make any sense to me, honestly. But what's even weirder is that he returns as a good guy during the Civil War Frontline storyline and fights alongside some pretty well-respected heroes like Battlestar and Solo before he's ultimately killed by Venom while facing off against the Secret Avengers. At number 6 is the Ringer. This is one of those characters that we can basically assume was named before his powers were decided, because ultimately it's a pretty ridiculous power and suit design, especially in the early days. He basically just shoots rings at his enemies, which can do anything between entrapping the target to exploding on impact to freezing. The first time we really encounter the Ringer, he's taken out pretty quickly by not Spider-Man but Nighthawk, losing some teeth in the battle and spending a lot of time in jail. He's then eventually killed by Scourge when he's called to a bar with a group of other villains, which ends up being a trap. Later, however, it's revealed that he doesn't actually die and is revived by AIM agents who give him a cyborg body, and he's renamed Strikeback. With a big enough power boost and a totally different mantle to make him a whole different character from the Ringer is essentially lost to obscurity, making him one of the most long-lost Spider-Man villains of all time. At number 5, we have Frank Oliver, aka Kangaroo. This guy's power is basically artificially enhanced legs. And aside from that, he's just known to be a very skilled boxer who is banned from the sport after seriously injuring one of his opponents. But the way that he gets this sort of lame jumping power is when Jonas Harrow approaches him and offers him the powers in exchange for his cooperation in a highly dangerous heist. While he's infiltrating the Hudson nuclear laboratories to steal some radioactive something or other, Spider-Man swoops in to try and stop him. Well, not stop him, but to save his life, because the room he's breaking into is so radioactive that it disintegrates him immediately upon entry, and Spider-Man watches on in horror as this happens. The Kangaroo Mantle has a couple other appearances, but as far as I'm concerned, this event marks the end for the villain and leaves him behind in the void of obscurity.
Number 3, Lord Deathman. The Japanese crime boss known as Lord Deathman has battled Batman both in American comics and in Japanese manga, using his powers to seemingly overcome death itself, able to rise from the grave no matter what his injury is. In his first appearance in Batman number 180 in May 1966, he passed away 3 times using a yogi technique to appear dead before the final conflict, which saw him get struck by lightning and actually pass away. But since then, he has actually gained the real power to come back from the dead, but at the cost of having a bare bones skull for a head. His regenerative abilities are so powerful that his blood is used to create the infamous Lazarus pits that Ra's al Ghul uses to stay young and immortal. One of the first ways Batman defeated Lord Death with his new powers is honestly a little out of character for the Crusader. He threw Lord Deathman off a building into the path of an armored car, which took the criminal down just long enough for Catwoman to lock him in a safe, and then he was shot into space. and he still came back. Number 2, the Condiment King. I think at this point, Condiment King is a little more well known, just because of how ridiculous he is. He first appeared in the DC animated universe as Buddy Standler, who was a comedian manipulated by the Joker into being a Batman villain. He became an even bigger joke of a character when he was introduced to the DC Comics as Mitchell Mayo. No, I am not joking, yes, that is his actual name. No one really takes Condiment King that seriously, and I can understand why, although it should be noted that he can totally stain your clothes, and if you're allergic to any of the condiments he fires out of his ketchup, barbecue sauce, and mustard guns, then he can be quite dangerous. What I'm most curious of is the quality of his short-lived restaurant when he temporarily went legit. Can you imagine if he couldn't even get food right? That would just suck. Number 1, Johnny Karaoke. I actually couldn't find a page for Johnny Karaoke on the DC Wiki, so that should tell you just how obscure this guy actually is. Johnny Karaoke is a Yakuza loan shark who has the odd knack of singing into his microphone as he is committing his crimes. A microphone whose stand doubles as a sword that he will pull out on you when you let your guard down from laughing at him. On top of his odd singing career, Johnny leads a little gang known as the Geisha Girls. That's spelled Grrrls, like girls. Very, very fear-inspiring. Maybe not the most intimidating of Batman's villains, not at all really, but this villain is honestly just too interesting to stay buried for too long. I'm personally advocating for the big screen debut of Johnny Karaoke, and it better be comic book accurate.
Number 10, Dexstar. For those not familiar with Dexstar, get ready because this little furball might be one of my favorite lanterns, at least my favorite Red Lantern. Dexstar was originally named Dexter and was just your average house cat. One day, however, his owner was brutally murdered and he himself was tossed into a bag and into a river. Dexter was of course frightened and sad, but he also found within himself a fierce rage, an anger so intense that Atrocitus felt his rage and reached out to him, offering him a place among the Red Lanterns. That day, Dexter became the ferocious space kitty known as Dexstar. While he has since become his own character, originally he was very much the sidekick of his beloved mentor, Atrocitus. Number 9, HUMPTY. You might be familiar with Lex Luthor's sidekicks Mercy Graves, but did you know he also had another bodyguard and sidekick as well? Her name was HUMPTY. Hope was first introduced in Adventures of Superman issue 573. When Lex became president of the United States, however, and failed to prevent an invasion, she decided to turn against him. When he realized that Hope was the leak and had told some shady stories about him to the Daily Planet, Lex Luthor had her secretly kidnapped and imprisoned. He tortured her and lobotomized her before Superman could manage to rescue her. Number 8, Black Swan. Black Swan is Yabit Umanturu, an alien from the alternate Earth of 1365. After being manipulated by Rabba Malal, known to her as the Great Destroyer, Black Swan set out to regrow her family, carrying with her their DNA and brain scans in order to do so. As she looked for a new world to rebuild her life on, she ended up on the Earth of Reality 616, attempting to convince others to destroy their Earths in order to avoid the disaster that was the incursion of worlds. Following the events on Battleworld and the whole rebuilding of Earth 616 and the multiverse, Black Swan found herself allied with Hela, who at the time was working with Thanos. From there, she ended up joining the Black Order, which would later be reformed. Number 7, the Walrus. Does anyone remember the Wonderland Gang, or just me? This was a gang that villains Tweedledee and Tweedledum led, composed of a collection of Wonderland-inspired characters. The Walrus became one of them. Just like many of the other members of the gang, he was pretty useless as a villain. The Walrus's real name was Mo Blum, and to fight against the heroes who would oppose his leader's criminal ways, he would fight using a tusked mask that he wore on his face. He had no superpowers to speak of, just that sweet, sweet mask that, as you can expect, was not really as effective as I'm sure he'd hoped it would be.
Number 7, Joker's daughter. Honestly, did not even know this character existed, which just shows how much I don't know about Batman's villains. Duella Dent is all over the place, psychologically I mean. She started as the villain who refers to herself as Joker's daughter, even though she is absolutely not his daughter. As you can tell, she has an unhealthy obsession with the clown, which has been a thing since she debuted in Batman Family number 6 in 1976. She has also claimed to be the daughter of Catwoman, Scarecrow, Riddler, and Penguin. She deduced Robin's identity, and he in turn revealed that she was Duella Dent, and that it was believed that she was actually Two-Face's daughter, which also isn't true as she is actually from Earth 3 and her father was Jokester, with her mother being Evelyn Dent, Earth 3's Three-Face. Despite not being Joker's child, Duella proves herself worthy of the title. She uses equipment that is very similar to the Joker's usual flair, and more recently she has been rewritten as almost completely bonkers, which is especially evident after the Clown Prince's seeming demise. Comics. Also, before 2011, she was on the Teen Titans as Harlequin for a while. Number 6. Cornelius Stirk. Cornelius Stirk is one of those villains that you don't hear much about, but is one of the more gruesome and terrifying members of Batman's rogue gallery. Stirk suffers from delusions which make him believe that he requires the nutrients of a human heart in order to stay alive, and not just any heart. Specifically, Cornelius believes that the heart is the most nutritious when it is full of norepinephrine, a natural hormone that secretes when a person is terrified, as well as adrenaline. So, he uses his unexplained psionic ability to mentally make people perceive him as someone else, which, other than allowing him to break out of Arkham Asylum, also allowed him to get close to his victims and then completely terrify them in the most insane ways before he quickly ends them and partakes in a nice old hearty meal, literally. I think the interesting thing about Stirk is that he is actually really effective at what he does, being able to evade Batman and even render him unconscious on one occasion. Number 5. Maxie ZEUS. I had a really cool history professor in high school who specifically taught classics, which is Greek and Roman history. Super cool guy, but I'm just imagining him becoming a Gotham crime lord. He was an awesome person, so I just can't see it, but luckily in DC Comics we have Maxie ZEUS, a former history teacher. Following the loss of his wife, Maxie ZEUS started to suffer from delusions that he was the actual human reincarnation of the god Zeus. Using his genius-level intellect, he became a Gotham City crime lord, establishing himself and his group of followers. I mean cultists. I mean mobsters. I don't really know. He had a short-lived battle against Batman, and he has been pretty much locked up at Arkham ever since, occasionally breaking out. Most recently though, his randomly super strong and ripped body was used to revive Deacon Blackfire, but this didn't last very long, so it doesn't really matter. Number 4. Colonel SULPHUR. This Denny O'Neil created villain from the 70s is an espionage expert with a weaponized artificial hand, a tool he has used to commit very espionage-type crimes. He's very Bond villainy if we're being honest. Colonel SULPHUR has a strange sunlight fixation though, meaning he only allows himself to act on his violent urges in the quote, morning's earliest minutes, which is one hell of a specific yet very obscure time frame for criminal activity. He did actually prove to be a bit more of a threat when he joined the Army of Crime. When the Army of Crime's activities were challenged by Batman and Superman, SULPHUR used an alien weapon to trap Superman and Batman in a timeless dimension. SULPHUR then used stolen weapons to take over Gotham City, but as you may suspect, he was soon stopped by Batman and Superman, who had escaped from the timeless dimension. These things happen. Sorry, dude.
Number 3. Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle was Poison Ivy's young protege and sidekick who appeared alongside some of the other Super Foes sidekicks in the original Super Friends in issue number 1. There, Poison Ivy was seen instructing Honeysuckle on how to climb, or more chastising her for wasting time chatting away. More speed and less talk, Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle looked pretty cute and also appears in the following issue of Super Friends, but we haven't really seen her since. It's also implied that there was some sort of competition where these youngsters auditioned to become supervillains in training. Bizarre. When I grow up, I want to be a supervillain too. Actually, that is true, I do want to be a supervillain. I would love to be Poison Ivy's protege. Number 2. Nasty Boys. People may remember the Marauders. It's hard not to, considering that they were the ones responsible behind the death of so many Morlocks. Poor Morlocks. And now, of course, the Marauders name has been redeemed by Captain Kate's new team of Marauders, who travel about working for the Hellfire Trading Company and freeing oppressed mutants around the world, helping them travel safely to the mutant nation of Krakoa. But while everyone has been talking about the Marauders on and on, Mr. Sinister decided afterward to create a new villainous sidekick gang, the Nasty Boys. Oh my. That's how I always read Sinister, by the way, in my head. I read him as like this hoity-toity, overly extravagant British man. That's my Nathaniel Essex. The Nasty Boys only lasted a few issues, but goodness, what a name and what a team. The team made their last appearance in Uncanny X-Men from 2019, not to be confused with the 2019 X-Men series. There's Uncanny X-Men and then there's X-Men. I know, it's confusing. We have X-Men 2019, Uncanny X-Men 2019, but they're separate. But the Nasty Boys were actually a product of the 90s. I mean, with a name like that, are you surprised? Number 1. Gaggy. Despite only appearing in a few issues, Gaggy quickly became a fan favorite. He first appeared in Batman issue 186 as the Joker's sidekick. Gaggy was a short entertainer and comedian that the Joker mainly kept around for, well, entertainment. However, despite how entertaining Gaggy was, he was not as useful as some of Joker's other henchmen, and ended up being replaced by Harley Quinn, who was also known for being Joker's girlfriend. Jealous of Harley, it was later revealed in Gotham City Sirens that Gagey actually attempted to get rid of her, seeking revenge on the sidekick that had replaced him, but ultimately he failed, due to the interference of the other Sirens, Catwoman, and Poison Ivy. Gagey's full name is Gagsworth A. Gagsworthy, and he recently reappeared once more in The Three Jokers book number 1, proving that although he may be lesser known, he has not been forgotten.